Not that we are sufficient in ourselves to claim anything as coming from us, but our sufficiency is from God, who has made us sufficient to be ministers of a new covenant. It is Friday, the 12th day of May, 2023. Clive Welsh here, encouraging you to join me as I sit here for the next 5 minutes or so with the devotional book in my hand entitled Truth for Life by Pastor Alistair Begg, and read to you today's portion, and it is entitled The Joy of Inadequacy. And the verses today, 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 5 and 6, which reads, Not that we are sufficient in ourselves to claim anything as coming from us, but our sufficiency is from God, who has made us sufficient to be ministers of a new covenant. That's 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. Alistair Begg writes, God's purpose for His people in every age is that we will depend upon Him entirely. This dependency does not come naturally to us because one of the greatest idols of every age is that of power. Its allure is strong, its ability to corrupt even stronger, and what's true now has always been so. Those who obtain power are those bold enough to pursue it, and they tend to be marked by characteristics like charisma and strong personalities. This is how many measure strength and usefulness. Tragically, even within the church, leaders have often been given authority and influence because of their magnetism rather than their character, and because of their ambition rather than their humility. Paul was well acquainted with such miscalculations. In fact, he even spent portions of 2 letters instructing the Corinthian church not to evaluate spiritual leaders by worldly standards. On some occasion, the Corinthians were tempted to align themselves with their favorite orator and to cherish worldly wisdom. On others, Paul had to combat the influence of so-called super-apostles, whose strength, giftings, and power were observable in a way which the Corinthians found appealing. That's 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 5, as well as 2 Corinthians 12, verse 11. By contrast, Paul said, When I am weak, then I am strong. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 10. He knew that the power of Christ was put on display in his weakness, and he readily confessed that he was not adequate for the work entrusted to him. Who is sufficient for these things? We may not be super apostles, but we can relate to the temptation of worldly thinking. We are all prone to rely on ourselves, on our personalities, or on our gifts. What we have learned is that spiritual usefulness isn't found in such things. Instead, it is discovered when we humble ourselves before God, when we acknowledge that we are wholly inadequate. Paul's confession must be ours. Weakness is actually strength. The very nature of the new covenant made by Jesus in His blood, and to which we bring nothing but our sin, should be all we need to remind us that we do not have what we need, but that He does. God is at work to bring us to that point, to convince us that He alone is adequate. Do we want to grow in boldness? Then we must embrace our weakness before God. He will lead us to a faith-filled boldness before others. Do you want to grow in usefulness? Then we must embrace our inadequacy in private, and God will prove His sufficiency through us. Have you considered the possibility that one of the greatest barriers in our usefulness in serving God may actually be our own sense of personal adequacy? Be sure to commit time to prayer and ask God to show you whether the delusion of self-sufficiency has steeped into your thinking in one way or another. Ask Him to take it from you, that you may serve in the freedom and joy of inadequacy, and watch Him do the work. something we can truly observe as we confess our inadequacy and lay ourselves before Him. We get to watch God work through vessels like ours, broken vessels, but God chooses and delights to choose vessels that have been discarded to make the manifold wisdom of His grace so beautiful. So find the joy of inadequacy today, in Jesus' name. And for those of you reading through the scriptures in a year, your assignment today, 1 Kings chapter 1 and 2, as well as the Gospel of Matthew chapter 6, verses 1 through 18. And may the Lord richly bless you and give you a great day. My name is Clive Welch.